This will be for the Khan Academy exercise. Write standard equation of a circle. All right, so for this exercise, you need to know the equation of a circle. That is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Okay, the coordinates of the center are h comma k. These are the x and y coordinates for the center. Okay, but they use h and k because the center is the most important coordinate. And the radius length is r. Don't forget, in the equation, it's r squared, but the length of the radius is just r. So the bottom line, to actually write the equation of the circle, you want to plug in h, you want to plug in k, and you want to plug in r squared. Okay, x and y are left alone in the final equation. All right, so it says here a circle has radius of 5/6, and it's centered at 3.6, 7.8. Write the equation of the circle. Okay, so recall that the equation of the circle is in this form, and they gave us the radius is 5/6. So the radius r is 5/6. And the coordinates for the center, these are the xy coordinates. This is h, and this is k. All right, so we are simply plugging those into the equation. All right, so x you leave alone. H is 7.8. That gets plugged in right there. So it's minus h, or minus 7.8. And that's squared. And we have y, leave that alone, minus k. Whoops, I plugged in the wrong one. All right, let's fix that real quick. H is the x coordinate. That goes right there. Okay, so that's going to be 3.6. Minus k, that's going to be minus 7.8. You just plug that in there. That gets squared. And r squared is going to be 5/6 squared. All right, if r is 5/6, r squared is going to be 5/6 squared. Remember, when you square a fraction, you square the numerator and you square the denominator. So that's 5 squared over 6 squared. Okay, 5 times 5 is 25. And 6 times 6 is 36. So that's going to get plugged in for r squared. All right, and that right there is the final answer. So let's enter that in the box. Parentheses, x minus 3.6, close parentheses, and I hit Shift 6 for the exponent. The exponent's a 2. Hit Tab, and then plus in the middle, parentheses again, y minus 7.8. Close parentheses, Shift 6. Exponent is 2. Hit Tab to bring it back down, equals, and that's 25/36. So I'm just, whoops, I accidentally, all right, let's see. So that equals 25/36. Okay, so for the squared, you can also use this and find the exponent. But I just like to use Shift 6. All right, and that is the caret symbol. That's the caret symbol to get the squared. Okay, make sure your answer is correct, and that's it. All right, write the equation of the circle, graph below. So this one is a little bit more work. So you want to get the coordinates for both of these points. Okay, this one here is the center. So let's get the coordinates. This is the x-axis. If you trace it down to the x-axis, the x-coordinate is 1. If If you trace it to the y-axis, it's a 2. Let's do the same thing here. This coordinate, you trace it down to the x-axis. It's between 2 and 3, so it's 2.5. And the y-axis right here, that's a 4. All right. Now remember, this is the center here. Obviously, you can see it's the center. All right. The coordinates for the center are h, comma, k. So the coordinates for the point on the circle are just x, comma, y. All right. So we need to plug both of these into the equation and find r squared. All right. We want to find r squared. We're going to do that by plugging these in. So the standard equation for the circle, all right, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. All right, so we have to plug in both points. All right, so let's start with the x. The x is 2.5 minus h, which is 1, and that gets squared. Y is 4 minus k, which is 2, and that gets squared, and that whole thing equals r squared. All right, 2.5 minus 1 is 1.5, and that's squared. Plus 4 minus 2 is 2, and that's squared, and that equals r squared. Okay, I'm going to do this whole thing on the calculator now. All right, and I get 6.25, and that equals r squared. So you're going to need that for the formula. Okay, that goes in place of r squared. So rewriting, remember for the final equation, you leave x alone, so it's going to be x minus, and the h is 1. It's x minus h, h is 1, and that gets squared, plus y minus k, you leave y alone, y minus k, which is 2, and that's squared, and that equals r squared, which is 6.25. So this right here is your final answer. All right, you have to leave x and y alone in the final equation and use h and k in the final equation. Only reason we needed this xy coordinate is to find r squared. Once we did that, we just used that in the equation. All right, x minus 1 plus y minus 2. Don't forget to square each one of those in the parentheses, and that equals r squared, which was 6.25. Now, just briefly, an alternative method would be to construct a right triangle here. Okay, this right here, this length, is your radius, r. Okay, and we can construct a right triangle. All right, if you go perfectly horizontal and perfectly vertical, this would make a right angle here. All right, you can easily find this side length just by counting. Each one of these blocks is a half. So it's going to be half, 1, and 1.5. And then right here, this is a half, 1, 1.5, and 2. That's a 2 right there. And then you just use Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Solve for the hypotenuse. And r squared is what you would use in the equation. In fact, you wouldn't even solve for r. You would just solve for r squared in the equation. This would be c squared if you want to do it that way. All right, one more. Write the equation. Okay, the radius is radical 45. Okay, we need r squared. So to solve for r squared, we're just going to square both sides. So r squared is radical 45 squared. Okay, and remember, when you square something under the square root, you just remove the square root. So radical 45 squared is just 45. That's your r squared. All right, the center is h, comma, k. So we're going to have to plug those in. All right, so you start with x minus, and h is negative 2.4. All right, watch your signs. Plus y minus, and k is negative 4.8. And that gets squared. And that equals r squared, which we said was 45. Remember, r was radical 45, but we squared it, so that became 45. Two negatives in a row make it positive. Same on the y's, and this is your final answer. Okay, of course, you don't have to put the plus signs twice, but that goes in the box. All right, x plus 2.4 plus y plus 4.8. Do not forget to square each one for the parentheses, and that equals 45. Like I said, for the exponent, you just hit shift 6. All right, for the exponent, you hit shift 6, and it will move it up so you can make the exponent. Then to bring it back down, you just hit tab. Okay, if you don't want to do it that way, use the menu here, and you can find the exponent option on the menu.